Greetings, this is Greg. I'm not turning this into a flight simulator channel, but these new home-based computer flight sims are getting really good. And there is some subject matter overlap between the flight sim world and the real world. In fact, most airline flight training being done today takes place in simulators. I've flown a wide range of simulations from the original Red Baron, and I don't mean the Dynamics version shown here, which was very good in its day. I mean the Atari version from about 1980. I played many of the sims from the 80s into the early 90s before wife, kids, and jobs sort of took time away from other pursuits. Now the kids are grown up, and I've been getting back into flight sims, and I've been impressed with all the improvements I've seen. One of my biggest complaints with flight sims, and I'm including some of the big airline training type sims here, which I have a lot of time in, is that oftentimes the ground doesn't seem to move quite right with respect to the airplane. On airline check rides, it's not unusual to see a pilot who flies the real airplane very well and who flies the simulator just fine when on instruments somehow then botch up a simple visual approach, which should be the easiest thing on the check ride. It's usually because the pilot is used to the real airplane and ground movement in the sim is sometimes a bit different. When playing IL2 Sturmovik, I feel that the ground movement is dead accurate. I really think they got this just right, but how can I verify it? Straight line speed would be easy to check, but I'm sure that's right. That part should just be easy for the programmers. It's the movement when turning and at different altitudes that's complicated. Well, there is a really good way to check this, and it's what we'll be doing in this episode. A part of the flight test for a commercial pilot's license in the United States involves some ground reference maneuvers. One of these is perfect for this test, as there is no way it will work properly unless the programmers got the simulation right. The specific maneuver I'm talking about is called a pylon turn. This should not be confused with turns around a point or eights across a road. These two ground reference maneuvers may look similar to pylon turns but are totally different. These two maneuvers are intended to demonstrate that the pilot can adjust his ground track to compensate for wind, and these will work in essentially any simulation. Pylon turns, however, are very different, so let's go over them. The aircraft is controlled about three axes. It yaws about the vertical axis, rolls about the longitudinal axis, and pitches about the lateral axis. All three of these axes run through the aircraft's center of gravity. The lateral axis thus runs laterally, and in the case of most World War II fighters, is located about where the pilot sits. You can, of course, find the exact location in flight just by pitching up and down and watching the wingtip for the point about which the rotation occurs. In a pylon turn, the objective is to turn the airplane and keep an imaginary line extending along the lateral axis onto a point on the ground. The complication is that the altitude at which this is possible, which is called pivotal altitude, varies hugely with the ground speed. This is a chart out of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and there is, of course, a math formula as well. The key point here, or the key points, are that higher ground speed means that you need a higher pivotal altitude and vice versa. Bank angle by itself has no effect on pivotal altitude. However, it does determine how far away you should be from your chosen pylon. I should mention that on the commercial pilot test, you would be doing eights on pylons involving left and right turns, but for our purposes, we'll only be doing a left turn for reasons that become clear. When doing the turns, you start out at your speed and altitude that's correct for the maneuver and then make adjustments. Since with any wind at all, your ground speed will vary, and when maintaining a given airspeed, then you're going to have to climb or descend as you go around to maintain that pivotal altitude. Now this is actually very easy. When the pylon moves aft of your lateral axis, or your reference point on the wing in this case, you're too low, so pull the stick back and this will increase your altitude and decrease your speed. The decrease in speed, of course, lowers the pivotal altitude. So those two things work well together. When it moves forward, move the stick forward. This technique will allow you to nail this maneuver every time. Without further ado, let's hop into our simulated FW190A5 in IL2 Sturmovik and try this out. I'm on the Wings of Liberty server. I find the name ironic. I'm flying in support of the National Socialist Workers' Party and up against Stalin's communist forces. Not a lot of liberty happening here today. We're zooming in here on the altimeter. You can see we're at about 70 meters. That means we need to add that to our calculated pivotal altitude, assuming we use a pylon near the airfield, which we will. In fact, to check the accuracy of the sim, we really have to use a pylon with a known altitude. That means in this case, something on or very near the airfield. Now, we are above the airfield. Our chosen point onto which to put our lateral axis is the group of 3 small shacks. The lateral axis in the 190 runs just forward of the aileron hinge, so that's the reference point on this plane we'll be using. You can see it's lined up about now. I've done the math and found that for our 220 kph, our pivotal altitude is 380 meters above the ground. Add in the 70 meters for field elevation and we get 450 meters. So that's our pivotal altitude in no wind conditions. I chose a left turn simply because it allows you to see the airspeed indicator and altimeter. About now, you see this point starting to move aft, so I'll pull back a little to gain some altitude, reduce the speed slightly, and the point will come back into the line. That's really about all there is to it. I have to say, I'm really impressed with the accuracy of this simulation in this regard. It's pretty much dead on. Getting pivotal altitude correct means that when strafing, bombing, landing, or doing just about anything else, what you see on your screen is moving correctly relative to the real aircraft, and that's a big deal. I've flown sims that cost millions of dollars that don't get this quite right, so my hat's off to the developers of IL2 Sturmovik. Now, this doesn't mean that the other new sims are not this good. I don't know, I haven't checked them. It also doesn't mean that IL2 is perfect. Of course, there are some inaccuracies in it, and I might talk about those another time. Back to Pylon Turns. After a pilot's initial commercial check ride, it's pretty rare to need to do pylon turns. I could see this being used by the military for planes which fire out the sides, possibly for aerial photography, but nobody in my career has ever asked me to do them. It's just an exercise, normally anyway, that, along with other maneuvers in the commercial pilot's test, are designed to demonstrate full control of the airplane. That's all for this episode. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Oh, and one more thing. I want to thank all of my subscribers and especially my Patreon supporters. They've really helped to make this channel justifiable financially and also to help me explain to my wife why I'm spending so much time on the computer. Additionally, and just as importantly, they've really helped establish the direction for the channel. It's very, very clear by remarks I've received through Patreon that people are in favor of the more heavily tech-oriented World War II aircraft information, so I'll be focusing on that quite a bit in the future, even though that wasn't really the focus of this particular video. Anyhow, we're in Morbach, Germany. I spend quite a bit of time here because the airline I work for flies here all the time, so I frequently fly a 767 from various points in the U.S. to a nearby airport. And in Morbach, there is this fairly nice war memorial. It's very well cared for, as you can see. They've got a Christmas tree that's lighted up at night. It's January, early January 2019 here. And see the wreaths are up. And again, it's primarily a World War I memorial. That's what the main display is here. I can't read German. You know, I should probably take the time to get one of those apps that translates everything visually so that I can read all this. I'm going to make it a point to do that. But it's kind of an interesting memorial. There's quite a bit of, I shouldn't say quite a bit, there's some interesting touristy stuff around Morbach. A lot of hiking trails, biking trails, historical castle. Apparently the origins of the werewolf stories are here and various other things. And you can see that part of the memorial is oriented towards World War II. I can just tell that by the dates. Again, I can't read any of this. And I'm not sure if they added the World War II stuff after they built the main memorial or what. But in any case, it's a quaint little place and a pretty impressive little memorial. Anyhow, again, thanks for everybody for watching, especially subscribers, and double especially Patreon supporters. And from Germany, I'm signing off, and I hope everybody has a good day. Goodbye.